The fog clings to Millbrook Valley like a living thing, wrapping around cabins that seem to grow from the earth itself. Census worker Elena Martinez has come here for what should be a routine headcount, but the moment she steps from her car, she knows something is terribly wrong. The trees whisper with voices that sound almost human. The villagers move with an unnatural grace, their eyes reflecting light like an animal's, and when they smile, she glimpses teeth that branch like roots. Elena carries more than just government paperwork. She's a descendant of the original settlers who fled this valley 8 generations ago. Her great-great-grandmother's journal warns of a pact made in desperation when starving colonists accepted the forest's offer of survival. Now Elena understands why her family never spoke of their origins. The villagers don't just live alongside nature, they've become it. As twilight falls, Elena realizes the census isn't about counting people. It's about determining if these beings still qualify as human at all. But the deeper question remains, what happens to census workers who learn the truth? Her hands trembling slightly, Elena clutches the worn leather journal that had belonged to her ancestor. The brittle pages contain sketches of twisted limbs and writings about the hungry time when winter stretched on for 7 months and the promised supply ships never came. According to the journal, 23 families had gathered in the heart of the forest, prepared to die rather than resort to consuming their dead. That's when the trees began to speak. Elena forces herself to walk toward the nearest cabin, her official badge feeling like a lead weight against her chest. The structure appears to have grown rather than been built, walls of living wood that pulse with a subtle rhythm like a heartbeat. Moss carpets the roof so thickly she can barely distinguish where nature ends and human habitation begins. "You've come at last." The voice emerges from somewhere above her head. Elena looks up to see a woman's face emerging from the bark of an enormous oak, her features beautiful but wrong, with skin that shifts between flesh and wood grain. "We've been expecting you, child of the fled ones." Elena's throat constricts. "I'm here to conduct a federal census, population count, demographic information." "Oh, we know exactly why you're here." Another voice, this time from her left. A man steps from behind a cluster of birch trees, but his movement is too fluid, too graceful. His fingers are slightly too long, and when he gestures, Elena glimpses what might be tiny leaves sprouting from his nail beds. The question is whether you understand. More figures emerge from the forest, or perhaps they were always there, camouflaged so perfectly that Elena's human eyes simply couldn't perceive them. Men and women of various ages, all sharing that same otherworldly beauty, that same subtle wrongness. Their clothes seem to be woven from spider silk and plant fibers, fitting their bodies like second skins. "My name is Marcus Thorne," the man says, and Elena recognizes the surname from her ancestor's journal. "My family was among those who chose to stay when yours chose to flee. We've prospered in our union with the forest. We've evolved." Elena fumbles with her clipboard, trying to maintain some semblance of professional composure. "How many people currently reside in Millbrook Valley?" Marcus tilts his head, and Elena hears a sound like wind through leaves, though the air is still. "People? That depends entirely on your definition." He gestures toward the gathered figures. "We number 47 souls, though human may no longer be the appropriate designation." The woman in the tree speaks again, her voice carrying the whisper of ancient wood. "Your great-great-grandmother was wise to record our transformation, Elena Martinez. She understood what was coming. The forest doesn't merely sustain us, it has claimed us generation by generation." Elena's pen hovers over her census form. The federal government has procedures for everything, but nothing in her training covered this scenario. How do you classify beings that were once human, but have become something else entirely? How do you count citizens who may no longer qualify for citizenship? "Show me," Elena whispers, surprising herself. "Show me what happened to them, what happened to the families who stayed." Marcus extends his hand, and Elena sees that his palm contains tiny root systems, pale tendrils that pulse with their own life. The forest called to us in our darkest hour. It offered sustenance, but the price was transformation. Each generation grew closer to the trees until the distinction became meaningless. The gathered villagers move closer, and Elena notices their feet barely disturb the forest floor. They walk as if they weigh nothing, as if they're part of the very earth beneath them. "Your census form asks the wrong questions," the tree woman says. "The question isn't how many humans live here. The question is whether you're ready to learn what we've become, and whether you're prepared to complete the circle your ancestors began." Darkness settles over the valley like a blanket, and Elena realizes with growing dread that she can no longer see her car through the mist. The morning fog clung to the valley like a living thing, its tendrils reaching through the pines with an almost deliberate intent. Sarah Chen adjusted her grip on the steering wheel as her government-issued sedan navigated another hairpin turn on the deteriorating mountain road. The GPS had given up 40 miles back, leaving only the hand-drawn map she'd been provided by the regional office, a crude sketch that seemed more folklore than cartography. She'd been a census worker for 8 years, visiting remote communities across the Pacific Northwest, but nothing had prepared her for this particular assignment. Millhaven wasn't on any official map. The settlement existed only in century-old records and whispered references in neighboring towns where locals spoke of it with the kind of hushed reverence reserved for ghost stories. The road ahead split around a massive Douglas fir, its trunk easily 20 feet in diameter. Sarah chose the left fork, following tire tracks so faint they might have been deer paths. The forest pressed closer here, ancient trees forming a cathedral of bark and shadow that filtered the sunlight into an underwater green. Something about the quality of light felt wrong, as if it moved differently than it should, bending at angles that made her eyes water. Her radio had been crackling with static for the past hour before finally falling silent. The silence was absolute. No bird songs, no insect hum, not even the whisper of wind through branches. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The settlement appeared suddenly, emerging from between the trees like a mirage materializing from desert heat. Sarah's foot found the brake instinctively, bringing the sedan to a stop at what passed for the village edge. Before her stretched perhaps 24 structures, though calling them buildings felt inadequate. They seemed grown rather than built, their walls flowing seamlessly from foundation to roof in curves that followed no architectural logic she recognized. The houses, if they were houses, appeared to be constructed from a combination of stone, wood, and something else entirely. Something organic that pulsed faintly in the filtered light, like skin stretched over bone. Vines and moss didn't simply cover these structures, they seemed integrated into their very substance, root systems visible through translucent walls that breathed with subtle rhythm. Sarah pulled her tablet from her briefcase, fingers trembling slightly as she accessed the census application. According to her records, Millhaven should have a population of approximately 63 residents, all carrying the same surname, Thornwood. No births or deaths had been reported in over 50 years, which was the primary reason for this mandatory wellness check, disguised as routine data collection. A figure emerged from the largest structure at the settlement's heart. Sarah's breath caught as the person, woman she thought, though the proportions seemed subtly wrong, approached her vehicle. The woman moved with fluid grace, her feet seeming to barely touch the ground. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, shifting between copper and gold as it flowed around her shoulders like liquid metal. But it was her eyes that made Sarah's hand freeze over the door handle. They were the deep green of old-growth forests, but within their depths something moved, not the normal dilation and contraction of pupils, but a writhing, branching pattern that resembled root systems spreading through rich soil. The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were perfectly white, but somehow too numerous, filling her mouth in neat rows that extended further back than anatomy should allow. When she spoke, her voice carried the sound of wind through leaves, of sap flowing through ancient bark. "Sarah Chen," the woman said, though no introductions had been made. "We've been expecting you." Sarah's training kicked in, suppressing the primal fear that clawed at her chest. She opened the car door and stepped out, clipboard in hand, professional smile fixed in place. "Good morning. I'm with the Bureau of Census. Are you the community representative I was told to contact?" "I am Vera Thornwood, eldest of our line." The woman's head tilted at an angle that seemed to exceed normal human range of motion, though eldest is perhaps a misleading term here. Time moves differently in Millhaven. More figures emerged from the living buildings, drawn by some silent call. Men, women, and children, all sharing the same otherworldly features: the impossible eyes, the fluid movements, skin with a faint greenish undertone that suggested chlorophyll flowing in their veins. They arranged themselves in a semicircle around Sarah's car, not threatening exactly, but definitely enclosing. "I'll need to conduct individual interviews," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Standard questions about household composition, income sources, that sort of thing." Vera's smile widened, revealing more of those perfect predatory teeth. "Of course. But first, you must be tired from your journey. We insist you stay the night. There are so many things about our community we're eager to share." The circle of villagers closed imperceptibly tighter, and Sarah realized with growing dread that leaving might not be an option they were willing to offer. The morning mist clung to the valley like gossamer threads, reluctant to surrender to the pale sunlight filtering through the canopy above. Sarah clutched her clipboard tighter as she approached the first dwelling, a cottage that seemed to have grown from the earth itself rather than been built upon it. The walls curved organically, covered in a tapestry of moss and flowering vines that pulsed with an almost imperceptible rhythm. She knocked on what she assumed was a door, though it bore little resemblance to any entrance she'd ever seen. The wood grain swirled in hypnotic patterns, and she found herself tracing the spirals with her eyes until a soft creaking broke the spell. The woman who answered stood nearly 7 feet tall, her limbs elongated in ways that defied normal human proportions. Her skin held a greenish undertone, like sunlight filtered through leaves, and her hair cascaded down her back in strands that moved independently of any breeze. Most unsettling were her eyes, ancient amber orbs that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. "You are the counter," the woman said, her voice carrying the whisper of wind through branches. "We have been expecting you." Sarah's training kicked in despite her unease. "Yes, I'm here to conduct the federal census. I need to collect some basic information about your household." The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. "I am Vera. Please, come inside." The interior defied logic. The space felt vast despite the cottage's modest external dimensions, and the walls breathed with a subtle expansion and contraction that made Sarah's stomach churn. Furniture grew directly from the floor, chairs and tables formed from living wood that continued to sprout small leaves and delicate flowers. "How many people live here?" Sarah asked, pen poised over her form. "People?" Vera tilted her head, the motion eerily bird-like. "Such a limiting word. There are 3 of us in this dwelling. And their ages?" Vera's laugh tinkled like water over stones. "Time moves differently here. I have seen perhaps 200 summers. My companions are younger, mere children at 60 and 90 years. Sarah's pen stopped moving. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "You doubt what you hear, yet you cannot deny what you see." Vera gestured to herself with arms that seemed to have too many joints. "We are not what you would call human, dear census taker. We evolved beyond such crude limitations long ago." A rustling from the back of the cottage drew Sarah's attention. 2 figures emerged from the shadows. One appeared to be a young man whose skin had the texture of bark, with fingers that ended in root-like tendrils. The other was an elderly woman whose hair had become actual branches, complete with a small bird's nest nestled among the twigs. "The forest chose us," the bark-skinned man said, his voice creaking like old timber. "It offered us transcendence from the prison of mortal flesh." Sarah backed toward the door, her rational mind screaming that this was impossible, that she was experiencing some sort of hallucination brought on by altitude sickness or gas leaks. This can't be real. Reality is far more malleable than your kind believes, the elderly woman wheezed, and when she exhaled, tiny spores drifted from her mouth like dandelion seeds. The forest is old, older than your civilization, older than your species. It remembers when the world was young and magic flowed through every living thing. Vera moved closer, and Sarah noticed that the woman's feet had no distinct toes, but rather ended in root-like appendages that seemed to draw nutrients directly from the earthen floor. Our ancestors came here fleeing persecution, seeking only to live in peace. The forest sensed their desperation, their need, and offered them a covenant. What kind of covenant? Sarah whispered, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Symbiosis, the bark man replied. We become one with the woodland, and in return we gain longevity, wisdom, connection to something greater than ourselves. We are the guardians now, protectors of this ancient power. The elderly woman shuffled forward, her branch hair rustling. But the covenant requires continuity, fresh blood to strengthen the bond between human consciousness and forest wisdom. Sarah's hand found the door handle behind her. You're talking about what? Converting people? We prefer awakening, Vera said softly. And it is always a choice, sweet child. The forest does not take unwilling vessels, though sometimes, the barkman added with a smile that split his wooden features unnaturally wide, it makes the choice easier by showing what wonders await. As if summoned by his words, the cottage walls began to glow with a soft, phosphorescent light. The living furniture pulsed with renewed vigor, and Sarah could swear she heard the faint sound of a heartbeat, not human, but something vast and patient and impossibly old. The forest was calling to her, and despite every instinct screaming for her to flee, Sarah found herself inexplicably drawn to answer. The morning brought no relief from the suffocating presence that had haunted Elena through the night. She packed her belongings with trembling hands, abandoning any pretense of completing her census work. Whatever lived in this village was not meant to be catalogued by government forms. But as she reached for her car keys, a soft knock echoed through the boarding house. Elena froze, watching the door handle turn slowly despite her certainty that she had locked it. Margaret entered without invitation, carrying a steaming cup on a wooden tray. Leaving so soon? The elderly woman's voice carried a musical quality that hadn't been there yesterday. But you haven't finished your work. Elena backed toward the window, clutching her bag. I've seen enough. The population count can wait. Margaret set the cup on the small table, steam rising in spirals that seemed to move against the still air. Drink with me first. It's a local blend. Helps with the adjustment. Adjustment to what? The woman's smile revealed teeth that appeared too sharp in the pale morning light. To understanding what you've stumbled into, dear child. You feel it already, don't you? The forest calling to you. Elena's hand found the window latch behind her. I don't know what you mean. The dreams. The whispers in languages older than civilization. The way your skin tingles when you look toward the tree line. Margaret moved closer, her footsteps silent on the creaking floorboards. You're changing just as we all did when we first arrived here. That's impossible. Is it? Margaret gestured toward the mirror above the dresser. Look at yourself. Against her better judgment, Elena turned. Her reflection showed the same face she'd worn for 32 years, but something fundamental had shifted. Her green eyes held flecks of gold that seemed to pulse with their own light. The cut on her hand from yesterday's brush with the thorns had vanished, leaving only smooth skin marked by faint, vine-like patterns beneath the surface. One night, Margaret whispered. One night breathing our air, drinking our water, walking our soil. The forest has already begun to claim you. Elena spun back around, but the room was empty. The cup remained on the table, its contents now showing a deep amber color that swirled without any visible disturbance. She could smell it from across the room, earth and honey, with an underlying sweetness that made her mouth water despite her terror. She forced herself toward the door, but her legs moved as if through thick syrup. Each step required enormous effort, while the cup seemed to grow more appealing. Just one sip, her mind suggested, just to see what it tastes like. The floorboards beneath her feet began to feel soft, organic. Looking down, she saw that the wood grain was moving, flowing like slow water. Thin rootlets had begun to emerge from the cracks between the boards, reaching toward her feet with delicate, searching movements. Outside the window, the forest had crept closer. Trees that had been hundreds of yards away now pressed against the glass, their branches tapping gently against the panes. Through the leaves, she glimpsed faces. Human features merged with bark and moss, watching her with ancient, patient eyes. The whispers started again, but now she could almost understand them. They spoke of belonging, of becoming, of joining something far greater than the small, fragile life she'd built in the city. They promised knowledge beyond human comprehension, experiences that would make her previous existence seem like a shadow. Her phone buzzed with a text message, jarring her back to reality. It was from her supervisor. Status report needed. Regional office hasn't heard from you. The words on the screen seemed to swim before her eyes, foreign and meaningless. What was a regional office? What relevance did her old life hold now that she'd glimpsed something so much more profound? Elena deleted the message without responding. The small act of severance felt both terrifying and liberating. She approached the cup with steady steps, no longer fighting the pull she felt toward it. The amber liquid reflected her face, but now she saw what she was becoming. Skin touched with the green flush of new leaves, hair that seemed to move with its own wind, features that belonged as much to the forest as to humanity. The first taste was everything the whispers had promised. Power flowed through her veins, knowledge bloomed in her mind like flowers after rain. She could feel the network of roots beneath the village, the slow pulse of sap through ancient trees, the collective consciousness of creatures who had transcended their original forms. But with the ecstasy came understanding of what she was losing. Her apartment back home, her career, her sister who called every Sunday, her small human concerns and joys, all of it was dissolving like sugar in water. The cup was empty now, and Elena could hear Margaret's laughter echoing from somewhere deep in the forest. Through the window, she watched her car's tires sink slowly into earth that had turned soft as quicksand. There would be no leaving now. The photographs scattered across my motel bed like tarot cards, revealing an impossible future. Each image showed the same thing. Humans in various stages of transformation, their flesh rippling with bark-like textures, eyes that held depths of ancient forest wisdom, fingers elongated into something resembling branches. I'd taken these pictures 3 days ago in Millbrook, but they seemed to document something from a fever dream. My laptop screen glowed in the dim room as I typed my preliminary report, then deleted it, then typed again. How could I explain what I'd witnessed? The census forms I'd collected were forgeries, beautiful, elaborate lies crafted to maintain the illusion that Millbrook's residents were merely human. The real population count was something the federal government wasn't prepared to understand. A soft knock at my door made me sweep the photographs into my briefcase. "Room service," came a voice I didn't recognize. I hadn't ordered room service. The Pineview Motel barely qualified as 3 stars, and their idea of amenities stopped at questionable coffee in the lobby. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a young woman holding a covered tray. She wore the same earth-tone clothing I'd noticed on every Millbrook resident, and her smile held that serene quality that had unsettled me from the beginning. "I think you have the wrong room," I called through the door. "Elena Vasquez, census worker for the federal government," she replied, and my blood chilled. "We thought you might be hungry." The lock seemed inadequate suddenly, a flimsy barrier between myself and whatever waited in the hallway. "I didn't order anything. It's a gift from the community. We want you to feel welcome." Her voice carried an odd resonance, like wind through deep forest canopy. I backed away from the door, reaching for my phone, but the screen showed no signal. The bars that had been present all evening had vanished. "Just leave it outside," I managed. "That wouldn't be neighborly. We pride ourselves on hospitality in these mountains." The doorknob turned slowly, though I was certain I'd locked it. The security chain held for a moment, then snapped with a sound like breaking twigs. The young woman entered, her movements fluid and unnatural, carrying her tray with ceremonial precision. Up close, I could see the details my camera had captured, but my mind had tried to rationalize away. Her skin had a subtle grain that resembled tree bark, and her eyes held flecks of green that seemed to shift and move. Her fingers, wrapped around the tray's handles, were slightly too long, tapering to points that might have been fingernails or might have been something else entirely. "You've been working so hard," she said, setting the tray on my small table. "Recording our little community, learning about our ways. We appreciate your thoroughness." The smell that rose from beneath the covered dish was rich and earthy, like mushrooms and moss after rain. My stomach responded involuntarily, though my mind screamed warnings. "What do you want?" I asked. "To thank you. Your arrival has been anticipated. The forest speaks of changes coming, and you're part of that conversation now." She lifted the cover to reveal what looked like ordinary stew, thick with vegetables and herbs I couldn't identify. "This will help you understand." "Understand what?" "Why we've thrived here for so long. Why the outside world's rules don't apply in places where older laws hold sway." She picked up the spoon and stirred the stew, releasing more of that intoxicating aroma. "Your government sends people to count us, to categorize us, to fit us into neat little boxes on forms. But some things can't be quantified." My briefcase sat on the bed behind me, full of evidence that could shatter their carefully maintained secret. But looking at this woman, this being, I began to understand the futility of that evidence. Who would believe it? And if they did, what then? Military intervention? Scientific study? The destruction of something that had taken centuries to evolve? "The stew," she continued, "contains herbs that grow only in our forest. They help newcomers adjust to our way of life. The transition is easier when the body is prepared." "Transition?" Her smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "You can't document our community without becoming part of it, Elena. That's always been the rule. Others have tried to leave, to report what they've seen. The forest doesn't permit that kind of betrayal." The implication hung between us like smoke. I thought of previous census workers, government officials, researchers who might have stumbled onto Millbrook's secret. How many had simply disappeared into these mountains? "You have a choice," she said, pushing the bowl toward me. "Join us willingly, and the transformation will be gentle. Fight it, and the forest will claim you anyway, but the process will be less comfortable." Outside my window, I could hear the wind picking up, carrying with it the scent of deep woods and ancient secrets. The photographs in my briefcase seemed to pulse with potential energy, evidence of a reality that would die with me either way. The morning light filtering through Sarah's cabin window held an unnatural green tinge, as if the forest itself was breathing color into the dawn. She'd barely slept, her dreams haunted by whispered voices and the sensation of roots growing beneath her skin. Every time she jerked awake, the feeling lingered, a strange tingling in her fingertips that made her wonder if she was losing her mind. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Through the window, she saw Elena waiting on the porch, carrying a wicker basket and wearing that same knowing smile that had unsettled Sarah since her arrival. "Good morning, dear," Elena called through the door. "I've brought breakfast and thought you might like to see more of our community today." Sarah hesitated, remembering Thomas's warnings about the deeper parts of the forest. But she needed answers, and Elena seemed to be the key to understanding what was really happening in Millbrook. "Just a moment," Sarah called back, quickly dressing and grabbing her census materials. When she opened the door, Elena's eyes seemed to catch the strange light, reflecting it back like polished stones. "You look tired," Elena observed, stepping inside uninvited. The forest can be overwhelming for newcomers. It takes time to adjust to its influence. The basket contained fresh bread, honey, and berries that looked unlike any variety Sarah recognized. They were deep purple, almost black, with an iridescent quality that reminded her of oil on water. "What kind of berries are these?" Sarah asked, though something made her reluctant to taste them. "A local variety. They've grown here longer than anyone can remember." Elena's fingers brushed Sarah's hand as she passed the bowl. "They help with the transition." Transition to what? Elena's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too sharp. "To belonging, dear. To truly seeing." They left the cabin together, walking deeper into the village than Sarah had ventured before. The houses grew older as they progressed, their architecture shifting from merely rustic to something more primitive. The wood seemed to flow rather than be built, growing in organic curves that hurt her eyes to follow. The villagers they encountered moved with that same eerie synchronization Sarah had noticed before. Children played in yards where the grass grew in perfect spirals, their laughter creating harmonics that resonated strangely in the air. Adults tended gardens where vegetables grew in impossible shapes, squash that curved into perfect helixes, tomatoes that clustered like coral formations. "How long has your family lived here, Elena?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual while taking notes. "Time moves differently in the deep places," Elena replied cryptically. "My grandmother's grandmother walked these paths, and her blood runs in the roots now. As will mine someday." They approached a clearing where several villagers had gathered around what Sarah initially thought was a large tree stump. As they drew closer, she realized it was something else entirely, a circular platform of living wood that pulsed with a faint bioluminescence. The villagers stood hand in hand around it, swaying slightly and humming in frequencies that made Sarah's teeth ache. "What are they doing?" she whispered. "Communing," Elena said simply. "The forest speaks to those who know how to listen." One of the villagers turned toward them, an elderly man Sarah recognized from her first day. But something was wrong with his face. Where his eyes should have been, there were hollow spaces filled with the same green light that tinted the morning air. Moss grew along his temples, and when he smiled, Sarah saw that his roots had replaced several teeth. "Welcome, Census Keeper," he said, his voice carrying impossible harmonics. "Have you come to count us among the living or the eternal?" Sarah took a step backward, her clipboard falling from numb fingers. I should go." "Should you?" Elena's hand closed over Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. "Or should you finally understand what you've stumbled into?" The other villagers had turned now, and Sarah saw that the transformation wasn't limited to the old man. Several showed signs of the same changes, bark-like patches on their skin, hair that moved like leaves in a breeze that didn't exist, fingers that had grown too long and ended in what might have been thorns. "You've been breathing our air for days now," Elena continued, her grip tightening. "Eating our food, drinking our water. Did you think there would be no consequence?" Sarah looked down at her own hands and felt her heart stop. The tingling she'd attributed to nerves was something else entirely. Thin green lines ran beneath her skin like veins, pulsing in rhythm with the strange humming that filled the clearing. "What have you done to me?" she gasped. "Nothing that wasn't already beginning," Elena said gently. "The forest chooses who belongs here. It's chosen you, Sarah. The only question now is whether you'll fight it or embrace what you're becoming." The villagers began to close in, their transformed faces showing something that might have been compassion. In the distance, Sarah could hear Thomas calling her name, his voice growing more desperate with each shout. But when she tried to call back, her voice emerged as something else entirely, a sound like wind through leaves, like roots breaking through earth. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like spectral fingers as Sarah made her way deeper into the woods, clutching the leather-bound journal she'd discovered in her cabin. The pages had revealed fragments of the village's true history, references to the joining, blood communion, and something called the First Mother that made her skin crawl. Behind her, she could hear the soft padding of footsteps. They'd been following her since dawn, though whenever she turned, the forest appeared empty save for the towering pines that seemed to lean inward, creating a living cathedral of shadow and whispered secrets. The path branched ahead, and Sarah hesitated. To the left, the trail wound back toward the village center, where normalcy still felt possible, where she could pretend the residents were merely eccentric mountain folk. To the right, deeper into the forest's heart, where the journal's final entry had mentioned a grove sacred to their kind. A branch snapped behind her. This time, when she spun around, she saw them. 3 villagers stood 30 feet away, their forms unnaturally still among the swaying trees. Elena was there, her silver hair catching the filtered sunlight, and beside her stood Marcus, the shopkeeper, whose smile had once seemed merely odd but now appeared predatory. The third figure was smaller, younger, the girl who'd served her tea at the inn, whose eyes had held depths no child should possess. "You've been reading," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the morning air, despite the distance between them. "Knowledge has weight here, Sarah. Once gained, it cannot be forgotten." Sarah's grip tightened on the journal. "What are you?" "We are what humanity could become," Marcus replied, taking a step forward. His movements were too fluid, lacking the slight imperfections that mark normal human motion. What it will become, given enough time. The child, though Sarah now doubted she was truly young, tilted her head with bird-like curiosity. "The forest chose you, Census woman. It whispers of your worthiness." A rustling filled the air, and Sarah realized it wasn't wind. The trees themselves were moving, their branches reaching toward her with deliberate intent. Bark shifted and groaned, revealing patterns that hurt to look at directly, spirals and angles that suggested geometries beyond human comprehension. "The first mother sleeps in the deep grove," Elena continued, her feet barely seeming to touch the ground as she glided closer. "She has slept for 300 years, dreaming of new daughters to join our family. Her dreams taste of your blood." Sarah stumbled backward, the journal clutched against her chest. "I'm a federal employee. People will come looking for me." Laughter rippled through the forest, not just from the 3 villagers, but from the trees themselves, a deep harmonic resonance that seemed to emerge from root and trunk and leaf. The sound made Sarah's teeth ache. "Others have come," Marcus said. "Census workers, forestry officials, the occasional lost hiker. The forest is patient. It learns from each visitor, grows stronger." The mist began to thicken, swirling around Sarah's ankles with unnatural purpose. Within its depths, she glimpsed shapes, faces twisted in expressions of rapture or agony, she couldn't tell which. Hands reached up from the forest floor, pale fingers breaking through soil and fallen leaves. "You can fight it," Elena said, her tone almost sympathetic. "Many do at first, but the transformation is inevitable once the forest has marked you. The question is whether you'll embrace the change willingly or resist until madness takes you." Sarah broke into a run, crashing through undergrowth as branches whipped at her face. Behind her, she heard no pursuit, only that same horrible laughter echoing through the trees. The journal bounced against her ribs as she fled, its pages fluttering like trapped birds. The forest grew denser around her, the paths twisting in ways that defied the topographical maps she'd studied. She should have been climbing toward the ridge, but instead found herself descending into a valley she was certain hadn't existed the day before. Ancient trees loomed on all sides, their trunks scarred with symbols that pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent glow. When she finally stopped, gasping for breath, Sarah realized she was lost. Worse, the quality of light had changed. The sun hung at the wrong angle, casting shadows that moved independently of the wind. The very air tasted different, thick with pollen that sparked against her tongue like electricity. She opened the journal with trembling hands, searching for any clue that might guide her back to civilization. But the pages had changed. New text had appeared overnight, written in her own handwriting, though she had no memory of forming the words. "The joining begins at moonrise. The forest has prepared a place for you in the deep grove. First Mother stirs in her slumber. She dreams of your children and their children's children, and the world that will be when the old boundaries fall. Sarah stared at the impossible words, her mind reeling. She hadn't written this. She couldn't have written this. Could she? The morning mist clung to Sarah's skin like cold breath as she followed Ilara deeper into the forest. Each step took her further from the village, further from any hope of rational explanation for what she'd witnessed. The trees here were different, older, their bark scarred with symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. "Your predecessor understood," Ilara said, her voice carrying an odd resonance among the ancient trunks. "Marcus Chen. He was here for 3 weeks before he stopped fighting what he was becoming." Sarah's blood chilled. What happened to him? Ilara paused beside a massive oak whose roots formed a natural throne. She settled onto the gnarled wood with fluid grace, her elongated fingers trailing over moss that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. He chose poorly, tried to leave after the first change took hold. The forest doesn't release its chosen easily. The census worker's hand moved instinctively to her phone, but the device remained dead. She'd tried charging it in the village, but the power seemed to drain away as quickly as it entered. "You're saying he's dead?" Death is such a limited concept. Ilara's smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. He became something else, something between human and tree, forever rooted in the deep places where sunlight never reaches. "Would you like to see him?" Every rational instinct screamed for Sarah to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if the earth itself was claiming her. The air tasted of copper and growing things, and she could swear she heard whispers in languages that predated human speech. "The transformation doesn't have to be painful," Ilara continued, rising from her root throne. "The villagers you've met, they embrace the change gradually, over generations. But the forest can be impatient with outsiders. It senses your potential, Sarah. Your bloodline carries something special." "My bloodline?" Ilara circled her slowly, and Sarah noticed the woman's movements had become more fluid, more predatory. "Your grandmother, wasn't it? Elena Vasquez. She came here once during the war, young, lost, seeking refuge in the mountains." Ilara's eyes gleamed with ancient memory. "She stayed a month, long enough for the forest to taste her essence, to plant its seeds." The world tilted. Sarah's grandmother had never mentioned visiting any mountain villages, but there had been gaps in her stories about the war years, periods she'd always deflected, with sad smiles and changes of subject. "That's impossible. She would have told me." "Would she?" Ilara's laugh was like wind through dying leaves. "Would you tell your granddaughter you'd been marked by something beyond human understanding? That you'd passed that mark down through your bloodline?" Sarah's skin began to itch, starting at her fingertips and spreading up her arms. She looked down and gasped. Thin green lines were emerging beneath her skin, following the path of her veins like delicate vines. They pulsed with their own faint light. "It's already beginning," Ilara whispered, close enough now that Sarah could smell the rich earth scent of her breath. "The forest recognizes its own. You can fight it, like Marcus did, and become something twisted and trapped. Or you can surrender and become something magnificent." The itching intensified, and Sarah clawed at her arms, but the lines only grew brighter. She could feel something stirring in her bones, a warmth that started in her core and radiated outward. It wasn't entirely unpleasant. "What do you want from me?" Sarah managed to gasp. "Nothing you wouldn't give freely, in time." Ilara's form was shifting subtly, her skin taking on a bark-like texture, her hair flowing like Spanish moss. "The village needs new blood, new perspectives. The old ways are dying out, and we must adapt or fade into legend. You could help us bridge the gap between what we were and what we must become." Sarah's vision began to blur at the edges, and she saw the forest differently now. The trees weren't just trees. They were vast, interconnected beings sharing thoughts and memories across centuries. She could sense their ancient wisdom, their patient hunger, their desperate loneliness for connection with something beyond themselves. "I can't," she whispered, but even as she spoke the words, she felt her resolve weakening. The green lines under her skin pulsed brighter, and she could swear she heard her grandmother's voice carried on the wind, speaking words in a dialect she'd never heard but somehow understood. "Come home, Mija. Come home where you belong." Elara extended one transformed hand, fingers now resembling delicate branches. "The choice is still yours, Sarah, but choose quickly. The forest grows impatient, and I cannot protect you much longer from its hunger." Behind them, deeper in the woods, something massive stirred. Sarah caught a glimpse of bark-covered limbs, of a face that might once have been human pressed into the trunk of an enormous pine. Marcus Chen's eyes, still painfully aware, pleaded with her from his wooden prison. The transformation in her arms accelerated, and Sarah felt her humanity slipping away like water through cupped fingers. The morning mist clung to Elena's skin like cobwebs as she followed Mirren deeper into the forest. Each step took her further from the village, further from any semblance of the world she knew. The trees here were different, older, their bark twisted into patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost purposeful. Faces emerged from the whorls and ridges when she wasn't looking directly, vanishing when she turned her head. "The joining begins at dawn," Mirren had whispered before leading her from the cottage. "But first you must understand what you're choosing." Elena's census forms lay abandoned on the kitchen table, their neat columns and bureaucratic precision meaningless now. The weight of her government identification felt foreign in her pocket, a relic from a life that seemed increasingly distant. The forest had been calling to her all night through her dreams, not with voices but with something deeper, a pull in her bones, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. They stopped at a clearing where the canopy opened like a cathedral dome. Ancient stone markers formed a perfect circle, each one carved with symbols that predated any written language Elena recognized. The stones hummed with an energy she could feel in her teeth, her fingernails, the roots of her hair. "This is where it happened," Mirren said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Where my ancestors first made the pact." Elena moved closer to the nearest stone. The symbols seemed to writhe under her gaze, rearranging themselves into new configurations. She reached out tentatively, her fingertips brushing the cold granite. The moment she made contact, visions flooded her mind. She saw the village as it had been 300 years ago, a handful of desperate families fleeing religious persecution, arriving at this hidden valley half dead from starvation and exposure. She watched them discover this clearing, felt their terror and wonder as they encountered the forest's ancient consciousness for the first time. The entity that dwelt here wasn't malevolent, but it was hungry for connection, lonely after millennia of isolation. The pact had been born from mutual need. The humans offered themselves as vessels, conduits through which the forest could experience sensation, emotion, memory. In return, they received protection, sustenance, and gradual transformation into something greater than their frail mortality. Elena gasped and pulled her hand away, but the visions continued. She saw generations of villagers undergoing the joining, their humanity slowly peeling away like old paint. She witnessed their children born already changed, already part of the greater organism that encompassed both forest and flesh. She felt their contentment, their sense of belonging to something vast and eternal. But she also felt what they had lost. The sharp edges of individual thought dulled into collective consciousness, the desperate beauty of human mortality exchanged for endless, unchanging existence. Love transformed into something alien and consuming. "You see now," Mirren said, studying Elena's face. "It's not a gift without cost. Why show me this?" Elena's voice cracked. "Why not just take me like the others?" "Because you're different." Mirren stepped closer, her elongated fingers tracing the air near Elena's cheek without quite touching. "The forest has been waiting for someone like you, someone with the strength to choose rather than simply succumb." The morning sun filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows across the stone circle. Elena could hear something moving in the underbrush, not animals but the villagers gathering for the ceremony. Their approach was silent but unmistakable, like a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. "What happens to the outside world if I refuse?" Elena asked. Mirren's smile was sad and ancient. "The same thing that has always happened. We remain hidden. You leave, file your report, and the government marks this valley as uninhabited. We've done it before. And if I accept? You become something the world has never seen, a bridge between what humanity was and what it could become. The forest has learned much from us over the centuries, but it still hungers for fresh perspective, new ways of being." Elena closed her eyes and let herself feel the pull of the trees, the whispered promises in her blood. The rational part of her mind catalogued everything she would lose: her career, her apartment in the city, her carefully ordered life. But that life felt hollow now, a paper-thin existence compared to the depth of connection the forest offered. The villagers emerged from the tree line, moving with their fluid, inhuman grace. Elena recognized faces from her census interviews, but they looked different here in the sacred space. More themselves, more honest about what they had become. Their eyes held depths that spoke of roots reaching through dark earth, of seasons cycling through consciousness, of communion beyond individual thought. At the center of the circle, the ground began to split. Something vast stirred beneath the soil, ready to receive her answer. Elena felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders, heavier than any decision she had ever faced. The boundary between horror and transcendence had dissolved completely, leaving only the raw truth of transformation. The morning mist clung to Maya's skin like silk as she followed Elias deeper into the forest's heart. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from exhaustion but from something pulling at her bones, drawing her marrow toward the earth beneath her feet. The trees here were different, ancient beyond measure, their bark scarred with symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. "The choosing place isn't much farther," Elias said, his voice carrying an odd resonance, as if the forest itself was speaking through him. His transformation had accelerated overnight. Green veins now pulsed visibly beneath his translucent skin, and his eyes had taken on the deep amber of tree sap. Maya's hand instinctively went to the cell phone in her pocket, though she knew it was useless this deep in the wilderness. No signal could penetrate the canopy above, where branches wove together in patterns too deliberate to be natural. She thought of her apartment back in Denver, her neat desk at the Census Bureau, her morning coffee routine. That life felt like a dream now, fading with each breath of the spore-laden air. "What happens if I choose to leave?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Elias paused, placing his palm against a massive oak whose trunk was easily 20 feet in diameter. The tree seemed to shiver at his touch, leaves rustling despite the still air. "The forest doesn't let go easily of those it has tasted. You've breathed our air for days now, eaten our food, walked our paths. Part of you is already ours." As if to confirm his words, Maya felt a strange tingling in her fingertips. When she looked down, she saw faint green lines tracing under her skin like delicate tattoos. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but alongside the fear came something else, a deep, primal sense of belonging that terrified her more than any physical change. They emerged into a circular clearing, dominated by a single tree so massive it dwarfed even the giants they'd passed. Its trunk stretched up beyond sight, disappearing into the canopy above, while its roots created a labyrinthine network across the forest floor. The bark was smooth as glass and dark as midnight, reflecting their images like a black mirror. "The mother tree," Elias whispered with reverence. "She's been here since before humans learned to speak. My ancestors found her 300 years ago, half dead from plague and starvation. She offered them a choice then, just as she offers you one now." Around the tree's base, Maya could see bones worked into the root system, not scattered carelessly but woven with deliberate artistry into the living wood. Skulls formed knots at major root junctions, while smaller bones created intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. These weren't the remains of sacrifices, she realized. They were the willing offerings of those who had chosen complete union. The transformation can be gradual, Elias continued, moving toward the tree with the careful reverence of a pilgrim approaching a shrine. Like mine, like most of our people. You keep your human consciousness, your memories, but gain so much more. The forest's wisdom becomes yours. You'll live for centuries, maybe millennia. You'll never know hunger or loneliness again. Maya watched as he pressed both palms against the mother tree's surface. Immediately, the green veins in his skin brightened, and she could swear she heard whispers in a language older than words. The tree itself seemed to pulse, as if awakening to his presence. "Or," he said, turning back to her with eyes that now glowed with an inner light, "you can choose complete unity. Become one with the mother tree herself. Your consciousness will join with all who came before, becoming part of something far greater than any individual existence." The whispers grew louder, and Maya realized they were coming from inside her own mind. Images flashed behind her eyes, centuries of memories from the village's inhabitants, their joys and sorrows, their gradual transformation from desperate refugees into something transcendent. She saw the forest as they saw it, not as a collection of trees, but as a single vast organism, with every root and branch and leaf connected in an intricate web of consciousness. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, somehow, impossibly, receiving a signal. The sound cut through the whispers like a blade, reminding her of the world beyond the forest's embrace. Her supervisor would be expecting her report. Her sister would call this weekend like she always did. There was a life waiting for her, ordinary and human and finite. But as she reached for the phone, her transformed fingers fumbled with the device. The green lines under her skin pulsed brighter, and she felt the mother tree's presence pressing against her mind like a gentle tide. The choice wasn't really a choice at all, she realized. It was merely a question of how quickly she would surrender to the inevitable. The phone slipped from her grasp and fell among the roots, where it was quickly claimed by reaching tendrils of bark and moss. The transformation had begun while I slept. I woke to find pale green veins threading beneath my skin like delicate tattoos, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the forest's ancient heartbeat. My fingernails had grown longer overnight, hardening into something resembling bark, and when I ran my tongue across my teeth, I felt new points that hadn't been there before. Elena stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching me with those luminous eyes that no longer seemed quite so alien. "The awakening is always difficult," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in my chest. "But you're stronger than most. The forest chose well." I stumbled to the cracked mirror above the wash basin. My reflection showed changes that should have terrified me, but instead filled me with a strange sense of completion. My pupils had elongated slightly, becoming more elliptical, and the irises had shifted from brown to amber with flecks of deep green. My hair, previously mousy brown, now held streaks of silver that caught the morning light like spun moonbeams. "What's happening to me?" I whispered, though I already knew. "You're becoming what you were always meant to be," Elena replied, approaching with that fluid grace they all possessed. "The census was merely a pretense, wasn't it, Sarah? You were drawn here by something deeper than duty." She was right. I'd felt the pull for weeks before receiving the assignment, dreams of green shadows and whispered promises calling me toward these mountains. I'd volunteered for this remote posting, telling myself it was professional curiosity, but the truth ran deeper than that. The forest had been calling me home to a place I'd never been. The others, like me, are not like you, Elena interrupted. Most who stumble upon our village are simply turned away, their memories gently clouded. But every few generations, one arrives who carries the old blood, dormant, diluted by centuries of mixing with ordinary humans, but still present, still waiting. I pressed my palms against the mirror, studying the changes in my hands. The skin between my fingers had begun to web slightly, and I could feel new connections forming in my mind, threads of consciousness that stretched beyond my individual thoughts into something vast and communal. "My grandmother," I said suddenly, the memory surfacing like bubbles rising from dark water. She always said our family came from the mountains, said we were different. Elena smiled, revealing her own sharp teeth. Different, yes. Your great-great-grandmother left this place during the Great Hiding, when the outside world grew too close and too curious. She was pregnant with a child who would never know his true heritage, but the blood remembers. It always remembers. Through the cabin's windows, I could see other villagers gathering in the square. Children who looked ageless and ancient played games that involved moving in perfect synchronization, their laughter creating musical patterns that made the surrounding trees sway without wind. Adults tended to gardens where impossible plants grew, flowers that glowed softly in the shadows, vegetables that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, herbs that whispered secrets when touched. "What about my life?" I asked, though the question felt hollow. "My job, my apartment, the people who wonder where I am?" What life? Elena's question wasn't cruel, but it cut deep because it was true. I had no close friends, no romantic attachments, no family that would miss me for more than a bureaucratic concern. I'd lived like someone waiting for something without knowing what, filling days with routine and nights with dreams of places that shouldn't exist. "The transformation accelerates now," Elena continued, her hand cool against my fevered forehead. "By tomorrow's dawn, you'll be fully awakened. The forest's voice will be clear to you, and you'll understand your purpose here." Purpose. The word resonated through my changing body like a struck bell. I'd never had a real purpose before, just obligations and expectations that felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. Outside, Marcus approached the cabin. Even through the walls, I could sense his presence like warmth from a fire. The connection between us had strengthened overnight, becoming something primal and magnetic. When he entered, I could smell the earth on his skin, hear the rustle of leaves in his voice. "The circle is prepared," he said to Elena, but his eyes remained fixed on me. "If she's willing." "The circle?" I asked. Elena's expression grew solemn. "The final joining, where you'll choose freely between the person you were and the being you're becoming. Some find the transition too difficult and ask to be returned to their former state, though they can never leave once they've seen our truth. And if I choose to become?" Marcus stepped closer, and I could feel the magnetic pull between us intensifying. "Then you become part of something eternal. Part of us." The green veins beneath my skin pulsed brighter, responding to his proximity, to the decision hanging in the air like morning mist. The ancient tome felt warm against Sarah's palm, its leather binding pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Elder Thorn stood beside her in the circle of twisted trees, his transformed features serene in the dappled moonlight, filtering through the canopy above. The other villagers had withdrawn to a respectful distance, their luminous eyes watching from the shadows like fallen stars. "The choosing cannot be undone," Thorn whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the very earth beneath their feet. "Once you drink from the heart's well, you become part of something that has existed since before your people first walked upright." Sarah's fingers traced the geometric patterns carved into the book's cover, feeling the way they seemed to shift and writhe under her touch. Her government-issued tablet lay discarded at the base of a massive oak, its screen cracked and dark, a relic of a world that suddenly felt impossibly distant. How could she return to filing reports and updating databases when she had glimpsed something so profound, so terrifyingly beautiful? "What happens to who I was?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be both everything and nothing. Thorn's smile revealed teeth that had grown too sharp, too numerous. "You remain yourself, but you become more. The Sarah Chen who worries about deadlines and pension plans, she will seem like a half-remembered dream. The Sarah who can hear the forest's ancient song, who can taste starlight and feel the pulse of every living thing for miles around. She is who you truly are." The book's pages fluttered open without her touching them, revealing text that writhed like living things across the yellowed parchment. The words were in no language she recognized, yet somehow their meaning bloomed in her mind like dark flowers. It spoke of the first communion, when desperate villagers fleeing a plague had made contact with something vast and patient that dwelled in the mountain's heart. It told of the slow transformation across generations, children born with eyes that reflected more than light, with hearts that beat in rhythm with the forest's deeper pulse. "My Census," Sarah said weakly, though the words felt absurd leaving her lips. "People will come looking when I don't report back, will they?" Elder Thorne gestured to her tablet. "Check your device one last time." With trembling hands, Sarah retrieved the cracked tablet and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, showing her current assignment status: census complete, village confirmed abandoned, no current residents. The timestamp showed her having filed the report 3 hours ago. "But I didn't." "The forest is old, Sarah. It has learned to protect itself in many ways." Thorne's eyes held infinite compassion. "Your world believes this place empty. Your supervisor has already reassigned you to a new district. As far as anyone knows, you completed your work here and moved on." Sarah stared at the impossible report, feeling the last threads connecting her to her old life unraveling. The forest had already chosen for her, had been choosing since the moment she'd first set foot on the mountain path. Every step had led her deeper into something that had been waiting patiently for her arrival. A sound like singing began to rise from the earth around them, though no human throat could have produced those harmonies. The other villagers emerged from the shadows, moving with that uncanny grace she'd first noticed, their transformed features beautiful and terrible in the shifting light. Children who were older than they appeared, adults whose skin held the texture of bark and whose hair moved like autumn leaves in a wind that touched nothing else. "The well," Thorne said, extending his hand toward a depression in the earth that Sarah was certain hadn't been there moments before. Water bubbled up from unknown depths, glowing with the same phosphorescent light that filled the villagers' eyes. "One drink, and you join a family that stretches back beyond memory. You'll never be alone again, never be merely human again." Sarah approached the well on unsteady legs, her reflection staring back from the luminous water. But it wasn't quite her reflection. The eyes were too bright, too knowing. The face was her own, but perfected somehow, showing her what she could become if she surrendered to the change. Behind her, the forest sang its ancient song, and she could almost understand the words. They spoke of belonging, of purpose, of becoming part of something vast and eternal. Her old life felt like a costume she'd worn without knowing it, uncomfortable and false. She cupped her hands and dipped them into the glowing water. It was warm, tasting of mineral earth and starlight, and something else, something that made her genetic code sing in recognition. The first sip sent fire through her veins, rewriting her at the cellular level. The second made her gasp as her vision sharpened beyond human limits. By the third, Sarah Chen, the census worker, was gone forever, and something far more wonderful and terrible had taken her place. The transformation had begun 3 days ago, and Elena could feel it accelerating with each passing hour. Her fingernails had darkened to the color of rich earth, and when she pressed them against her skin, thin lines of bark-like texture appeared beneath. The change wasn't painful. That was perhaps the most disturbing part. It felt natural, like coming home after a long journey. She sat on the edge of her bed in the cottage they'd given her, watching dawn break through the canopy outside her window. The light filtered green and gold through leaves that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Everything in this place was alive in ways she'd never imagined possible, and now she was becoming part of it. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elena Thorne's voice carried that same musical quality all the villagers possessed, but his held notes of concern. "The council wishes to speak with you." She'd been expecting this. The Council of Roots, as they called themselves, had been patient with her confusion and fear, but she knew they couldn't wait forever. The forest had already begun claiming her. There would be no reversing the process now. Elena opened the door to find Thorne's appearance had shifted again overnight. The bark patterns on his skin had deepened, and his eyes held flecks of amber that caught the morning light like trapped sunlight. He was beautiful in an utterly inhuman way. "How long do I have?" she asked, as they walked through the village center. "Before the change completes? Perhaps 2 more days." His hand brushed hers, and she felt warmth flow between them. Not just heat, but something deeper. Life force, maybe. "Elena, you don't have to fear this. What we become, it's better than what we were." They passed the census forms she'd abandoned days ago, now overgrown with creeping vines that had sprouted from the wooden table. Nature was already reclaiming her old life, erasing the evidence of the world she'd come from. The council met in the heart of the village, beneath an enormous oak whose trunk had grown around and through several of the oldest cottages. Elena recognized the 5 members now: Vera, whose transformation was so complete she appeared more tree than human; Marcus, whose skin bore the patterns of river stones; and 3 others whose names shifted like whispers in her memory. "Child of 2 worlds," Vera spoke, her voice rustling like leaves. "You stand at the threshold. The forest has chosen you, but choice remains yours to make." Elena's throat felt tight. "What choice? You said the change can't be reversed." "Not reversed, no, but you can choose how you complete it." Marcus stepped forward, his movements fluid like water over rocks. "You can fight it, cling to your old self until the transformation tears you apart. Many have tried this path. Their screams still echo in the deep woods." A chill ran down Elena's spine, and she noticed the bark-like patches on her arms seemed to respond, tightening protectively. "Or," Vera continued, "you can embrace what you're becoming. Let the forest teach you its secrets. Learn to speak with the roots, to taste sunlight, to feel the songs that flow through sap and stone. And, if I choose that path, then you become one of us truly. Guardian of this place, keeper of its mysteries." The eldest council member, whose name Elena couldn't quite grasp, stepped from the shadows. His form was barely recognizable as human anymore, a beautiful fusion of flesh and living wood. "But you can never leave, never return to the world you knew." Elena thought of her apartment in the city, her job at the Census Bureau, her few friends who probably hadn't even noticed her extended absence yet. That life felt thin and colorless compared to the vibrant intensity of this place. Even her memories of it seemed to be fading, replaced by new sensations she had no names for. "What about my report? People will come looking when I don't return." "The forest is vast," Vera said simply. "People disappear in mountains. Equipment fails. Records are lost. Your world will create its own explanations." A sound drew Elena's attention. Her satellite phone, which she'd thought was completely dead, was crackling to life in her backpack. Through the static, she could make out a voice calling her name, her supervisor probably, the outside world trying to reel her back in. The council members waited silently as Elena stared at the device. She could answer it, try to explain where she was, what she'd found. But how could she describe this place to people who'd never felt the pulse of living wood beneath their skin? How could she return to filing reports and conducting interviews when she was beginning to understand languages spoken in growth rings and root networks? The phone crackled again, more urgently now. Elena reached for it, her darkened fingernails clicking against the plastic case. The choice Vera had described wasn't really about the transformation, that was already decided. The real choice was about who she would become in the process. She looked up at the council, at Thorn standing beside them, at the living village around her that breathed with forest rhythms. Then she made her decision. The ritual chamber pulsed with another worldly heartbeat, its walls breathing in rhythm with the ancient roots that formed its foundation. Sarah stood at the threshold, her census clipboard long forgotten somewhere in the labyrinthine tunnels behind her. The transformed villagers arranged themselves in a perfect circle around a pool of liquid darkness that reflected no light, only hungry shadows. Elder Thorn's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, his human vocal cords having long since evolved into something that could channel the forest's whispers directly. The choosing hour arrives, Sarah Chen. The roots have tasted your essence through 7 days of walking among us. They have found you acceptable. She watched in horrified fascination as the villagers began to shed their human facades entirely. Skin split like bark peeling from trees, revealing the gleaming wood beneath. Their eyes became deep hollows filled with phosphorescent moss, and their fingers extended into root-like tendrils that burrowed into the earthen floor. They were beautiful and terrible, no longer even pretending to be what they once were. "You've seen our truth," whispered Marina, the young mother whose children Sarah had met on her first day. The woman's face was half transformed, human flesh flowing seamlessly into smooth bark. "You know what we've become, what we've gained." Sarah's mind reeled as she processed the full scope of their evolution. These weren't monsters. They were something beyond human comprehension, beings who had transcended the limitations of flesh through their mystical bond with the forest. They lived for centuries, perhaps millennia, sharing consciousness with every tree, every growing thing for hundreds of miles. "The government you serve," Elder Thorne continued, his form now more tree than man, "would see us as specimens to be studied, harvested, destroyed. They would cage our children and burn our groves. You know this truth in your heart." She did know it. Sarah had worked for the Census Bureau long enough to understand how bureaucracy dealt with anomalies. Forms would be filed, special divisions would be contacted, and within months this place would be swarming with scientists and soldiers. The village would be razed, the forest cordoned off, and these ancient beings would become test subjects in sterile laboratories. The dark pool at the chamber's center began to churn, and Sarah felt its pull like a physical force. Something vast and intelligent dwelt in those depths, the heart of the forest itself, she realized. It was older than human civilization, older than the pyramids or Stonehenge, a consciousness that had been growing and learning since the world was young. "Join us willingly," the collective voice of the villagers urged, their words harmonizing like wind through leaves, and retain the essence of who you are while becoming so much more. We do not lose ourselves in the transformation. We expand beyond the prison of singular flesh. Sarah felt the truth of their words resonating in her bones. Through her week among them, she had glimpsed fragments of their shared consciousness. The overwhelming peace of communing with the entire ecosystem, the profound wisdom gathered across generations, the absolute belonging that came with being part of something infinitely larger than oneself. But the choice would be permanent. Once she entered that dark pool, once the forest's essence merged with her blood, there would be no return to her old life. No morning coffee in her apartment overlooking the city, no calls from her sister in Portland, no career advancement or retirement plans or any of the human concerns that had shaped her existence for 34 years. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. The silence that followed was not threatening, but infinitely sad. Elder Thorne's transformed face showed something like regret as he spoke. "Then you leave this place with no memory of what you've seen. The forest's gift includes the power to cloud minds, to edit recollections. You would file your report declaring the village abandoned, and our secret would remain safe. But," Marina added softly, "you would spend the rest of your life feeling incomplete, haunted by dreams you can't quite remember, longing for something your conscious mind will never be able to name." Sarah approached the edge of the dark pool, her reflection invisible in its depths. She could feel the weight of centuries pressing against her consciousness, offering glimpses of the vast tapestry of existence she could join. Every root system in the forest connected to every other, creating a network of shared experience that spanned continents. She would never be alone again, never feel the grinding isolation that had driven her to take a job that kept her traveling, always moving, never staying long enough to form real connections. The transformed villagers waited with infinite patience as Sarah wrestled with the most important decision of her life. In the darkness of the pool, ancient eyes opened and looked up at her with something like hope. The forest itself was holding its breath, every leaf motionless, every creature silent. She thought of her empty apartment, her disconnected existence, the profound loneliness that had become her constant companion. Then she looked around at the faces surrounding her, no longer human, but somehow more than human, radiating contentment and purpose she had never experienced. The transformation had begun during the night, and Maya could feel it coursing through her veins like liquid fire. Her fingernails had darkened to the color of rich earth, and when she pressed her palm against the cottage wall, she could sense the pulse of the forest through the wooden boards. The boundary between her flesh and the ancient woods was dissolving with each passing hour. Elder Thorn stood in the doorway, his bark-like skin catching the early morning light that filtered through the canopy. "The choosing ceremony must happen today," he said, his voice carrying the whisper of wind through leaves. "Your human form is already changing. Soon, the choice will be made for you." Maya's laptop lay open on the table, its screen displaying the partially completed census report she'd been working on for days. The cursor blinked in the field labeled population status, a mundane bureaucratic requirement that now seemed absurd. How could she possibly categorize what she'd discovered here? The drop-down menu offered options like standard, relocated, or deceased, but nothing for evolved beyond human recognition. "I need more time," she said, though even as the words left her lips, she could taste the sweetness of tree sap on her tongue. Her saliva had taken on an amber quality, and she found herself craving the mineral-rich soil she'd seen the children consuming in their strange games. "Time is what we have given you," Thorn replied, stepping into the room. Where his feet touched the floor, tiny mushrooms sprouted between the wooden planks. "But the forest grows impatient. It has already marked you as its own." Through the window, Maya could see the other villagers gathering in the central clearing. Their forms shifted and flowed in the dappled sunlight, some appearing almost human, while others had progressed so far into their metamorphosis that they resembled walking trees more than people. Children with bark for skin played alongside creatures that might once have been their grandparents, now towering beings whose arms had become branches heavy with fruit. The sight should have terrified her, but instead, Maya felt a deep longing to join them. The rational part of her mind, the part trained in data collection and systematic analysis, screamed warnings about losing her identity, her humanity, her entire world beyond this hidden valley. But that voice was growing fainter with each breath of the spore-laden air. "What happens to my life?" she asked. "My job? My apartment? The people who know me?" Thorn's expression softened, and for a moment she glimpsed the man he might have been centuries ago, before the forest claimed him. "Maya Delacroix, census worker, will simply disappear. It happens more often than your government admits. People vanish into the wilderness, leaving behind only questions and paperwork. Your supervisors will mark your file as missing, presumed dead, and assign your cases to someone else." The brutal honesty of his words cut through the dreamy haze that had been settling over her thoughts. She thought of her small apartment in the city, her routine of coffee shops and weekend farmers' markets, her sister who called every Sunday. All of it would become a mystery, another cold case gathering dust in some filing cabinet. But when she looked down at her hands, she saw delicate green veins spreading beneath her skin like the pattern of leaves. The change was beautiful in a way that defied explanation. She felt stronger than she ever had, more connected to something vast and ancient and purposeful. The petty concerns of her old life seemed suddenly trivial compared to the deep wisdom she could sense flowing through the root network beneath her feet. "The ceremony," she said finally. "Explain it to me." Thorn nodded toward the clearing where the villagers waited. "You will drink from the heart spring, the source of our transformation. The water carries the concentrated essence of the forest's consciousness. Once it enters your system fully, the change will be irreversible. You will become one of us, bound to this place and its secrets forever." Maya closed the laptop with a decisive click. The census report would never be filed, never processed through the proper channels. A discovery would remain hidden, just as it had been for generations. But as she stood and felt the strength of centuries-old oaks flowing through her transformed muscles, she realized she no longer cared about bureaucratic protocols. "And if I refuse, the partial transformation you've already undergone will kill you within hours. Your body cannot exist between states indefinitely. You must either complete the change or die fighting it." The choice, Maya understood, had been made the moment she'd taken her first breath in the village. Everything since then had simply been an elaborate dance around the inevitable. She could feel the forest calling to her, offering belonging and purpose beyond anything her human existence had provided. With steady steps she walked toward the door and the ceremony that waited beyond. The transformation had begun the moment Elena accepted the crimson sap from Thorn's outstretched palm. Now, 3 days later, she could feel her humanity slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. Her reflection in the cabin's cracked mirror showed eyes that held flecks of amber, skin that seemed to pulse with an inner luminescence, and veins that traced dark patterns beneath the surface like root systems seeking purchase. The forest called to her constantly now, a whispered symphony that made her former life seem like a half-remembered dream. Her census forms lay scattered across the floor, meaningless bureaucratic remnants of a world that felt increasingly foreign. The careful documentation of names and addresses had been replaced by something far more profound, an understanding of the village that transcended mere numbers. She could sense each resident now, their life forces humming through the interconnected network of ancient trees. Thorn's presence burned brightest, a beacon of otherworldly power that drew her like a moth to flame. The children she'd once thought normal now revealed themselves as something far more beautiful and terrible, their laughter carrying harmonics that spoke directly to the transformed portions of her soul. The hunger came in waves, not for food. Her body seemed to sustain itself on something else entirely now, but for deeper connection, for the complete surrender that would bind her forever to this place. Elena found herself walking to the village center without conscious decision, her bare feet knowing the path even in the pre-dawn darkness. The great oak waited, its massive trunk scarred with symbols that now made perfect sense to her changing mind. The tree pulsed with a heartbeat older than civilization, and she could see the silver threads of connection flowing between it and every living thing in the valley. This was the source, the ancient entity that had shaped the villagers across centuries of careful cultivation. "You're fighting it!" Thorn's voice came from behind her, neither surprised nor judgmental. He moved like shadow given form, his footsteps making no sound on the forest floor. "Part of me is," Elena admitted, pressing her palm against the oak's bark. The contact sent electricity racing up her arm, and she gasped as visions flooded her mind. Generations of census workers, government officials, and lost travelers who had faced this same choice. Most had fled in terror. A precious few had stayed, adding their essence to the collective. "Fear is natural," Thorn said, moving to stand beside her. "We were human once too. We remember the terror of losing what we thought made us who we are." Elena watched as his hand joined hers on the bark, their fingers intertwining. Where their skin touched, she felt the full weight of his transformation, decades of gradual change that had elevated him beyond mortality while preserving the core of his being. "But what am I becoming?" she whispered. "Something more," he replied. "The forest doesn't diminish us, Elena. It reveals what we were always meant to be." Around them, other villagers began to emerge from the shadows. Elena recognized faces that had seemed perfectly human just days ago, now showing their true nature in the moonlight. Their movements were too fluid, their eyes too knowing, their very presence radiating a power that made the air itself seem alive. They formed a circle around the oak, and Elena realized this was a ceremony older than the village itself. The tree's roots shifted beneath her feet, growing warm with anticipation. She could feel the forest's attention focused entirely on this moment, as if every leaf and branch held its breath. "The choice must be yours," Thorn said, though his voice now carried harmonics that suggested multiple speakers. "We cannot take what isn't freely given." Elena closed her eyes and reached deeper into herself, seeking the woman who had arrived here with her clipboard and federal mandate. That person seemed impossibly small now, bounded by rules and regulations that meant nothing in the face of something truly infinite. She had spent her life counting and categorizing, but had never truly lived. The transformation accelerated as her resistance crumbled. She felt her cellular structure reorganizing itself, becoming something that could survive for centuries, something that could commune directly with the forest's ancient consciousness. The pain was exquisite, like being reborn at the molecular level. When she opened her eyes again, the world had become a tapestry of interconnected energy. She could see the life force flowing through every plant, every stone, every breath of wind. The villagers' faces shone with welcome, recognizing her as one of their own. Her old life collapsed into irrelevance, the apartment she'd never see again, the job that would eventually send someone looking for her, the family that would file missing person reports and gradually move on. All of it faded before the overwhelming beauty of what she had gained. Elena smiled, feeling roots of belonging sink deep into soil that would nurture her for millennia to come. The forest sang her name in voices older than memory, and she answered with the entirety of her transformed being. The census worker had completed her final count. The transformation began at dawn. Sarah felt it first as a tingling in her fingertips, a warmth that spread up her arms like liquid fire. She had made her choice in the circle of ancient trees, accepting the chalice from Elder Thorn's gnarled hands. The crimson liquid had tasted of earth and copper, of secrets buried deep in loam and shadow. Now, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through her cottage window, her body was claiming its new heritage. She stumbled to the mirror, gasping at her reflection. Her eyes had shifted from brown to a deep forest green, flecked with gold that seemed to move like sunlight through leaves. Her skin held a luminous quality, as if lit from within by some primordial glow. When she flexed her fingers, she could see the faint tracery of what looked like bark patterns beneath her flesh. A knock at her door interrupted her examination. She opened it to find Mira standing on the threshold, no longer the frightened girl who had first warned her about the village's secrets. The child's transformation was complete, her limbs elongated and graceful, her hair flowing like Spanish moss, her eyes ancient beyond her years. "The forest calls," Mira said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "The old ones wish to welcome their newest daughter." Sarah nodded, understanding flooding through her without words. She could feel them all now. Every villager, every tree, every root and branch, connected through an invisible network that pulsed with shared consciousness. The loneliness that had plagued her entire adult life dissolved like morning mist. They walked together through streets that seemed different in the dawn light. The buildings appeared more organic, as if they had grown rather than been built. Vines and moss covered surfaces that had been bare stone yesterday, and she realized the village was reclaiming its true nature, no longer needing to maintain human pretenses for her benefit. In the central square, the entire population had gathered. Men and women stood in concentric circles around the great oak that served as the village's heart. Sarah could see the full spectrum of their evolution now. Some barely changed from human form, others so transformed they seemed like living embodiments of the forest itself. Elder Thorn waited at the tree's base, his form more plant than flesh, roots extending from his feet into the earth below. "Come, census taker," he called, and his voice rustled like wind through leaves. "Take your count now. See what we truly are." Sarah approached the circle, feeling the pull of ancient magic in her bones. With each step, the transformation accelerated. Her hair darkened to black-green, and she could feel something shifting beneath her shoulder blades, not painful but profound. The boundaries between herself and the world around her began to blur. She thought of her supervisor waiting for her report, of the government office with its fluorescent lights and sterile air. That world felt impossibly distant now, like a half-remembered dream from childhood. Her smartphone lay dead in her cottage, its battery drained by forces that didn't recognize human technology. Even if she wanted to call for help, the outside world might as well be on another planet. But did she want to call for help? The question surprised her with its answer. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Every nerve ending sang with connection to something greater than herself. She could sense the slow, patient thoughts of the trees, the quick, darting consciousness of squirrels in the branches, the deep, sleeping wisdom of the mountain itself. Elder Thorn extended his hand, and when Sarah took it, bark began to spread up her arm in delicate spirals. The sensation was oddly comforting, like being embraced by the earth itself. "We are the guardians," he explained as her transformation continued. "The forest chose us centuries ago when the first loggers came. We became something new to protect, something old. Now you understand the choice before you." Sarah looked around the circle of faces, some human, some other, all watching her with patient kindness. She thought of her empty apartment, her thankless job, the crushing weight of modern isolation. Then she thought of Mira's laughter echoing through the trees, of shared consciousness and purpose, of belonging to something eternal and meaningful. The changes were accelerating now. Her legs grew strong and supple, able to bend in ways that would have been impossible hours before. Her senses sharpened until she could hear individual conversations between birds, smell the emotional states of every creature within a mile radius. Most remarkably, she could feel the vast network of root systems beneath her feet, connecting every living thing in an intricate web of communication. As the sun reached its zenith, Sarah felt her old identity slip away like a discarded skin. The woman who had driven up the mountain 3 days ago no longer existed. In her place stood something new, guardian, protector, child of the deep wood. She raised her face to the canopy above and smiled, finally home. The transformation began at dawn, just as Elena had known it would. She felt the first stirrings in her bloodstream as golden light filtered through the canopy above, each ray carrying whispers from the ancient trees. Her skin tingled where the village elder's ceremonial blade had made its shallow cuts the night before, sealing her choice with drops of sap that now coursed through her veins like liquid starlight. She sat cross-legged in the sacred grove, surrounded by the villagers who had once terrified her with their otherworldly appearance. Now she understood that their elongated limbs, bark-like skin, and eyes that held the depth of centuries weren't abominations. They were evolution. They were what humanity could become when it stopped fighting the natural world and learned to merge with it instead. "The pain will pass," whispered Thorn, the village elder, whose voice now sounded like wind through leaves. "Let the forest claim you willingly, and the transition will be gentle." Elena nodded, feeling her bones begin to stretch and lengthen. Her government identification lay scattered on the forest floor beside her. Driver's license, badge, credentials, all the proof of her former life as a census worker feeding the hungry earth. That woman, with her neat reports and digital tablet, felt like someone she'd dreamed rather than been. The changes accelerated as the sun climbed higher, her fingers extended, joints popping as new segments formed. When she flexed them experimentally, she could feel the pulse of every tree root for miles around, their underground network spreading like a vast nervous system beneath the mountain. Her skin darkened and roughened, taking on the resilient texture of old oak bark. She watched with fascination rather than horror as small twigs began to sprout from her knuckles. "Your colleagues will come looking eventually," she managed to say, though her voice already carried an alien timbre. "When I don't file my report." Thorn smiled, revealing teeth like polished river stones. "They'll find evidence of a landslide. We've prepared such things before. Your car, your belongings, all buried beneath tons of carefully arranged rubble. As far as the outside world knows, Elena Martinez died in a tragic accident while conducting routine census work." The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Elena felt only relief. She'd spent her entire career documenting populations, counting and categorizing people like livestock. But here, she'd discovered a community that had transcended such crude measurements. They weren't simply human anymore, and their numbers couldn't be captured on any government form. Her spine curved as new vertebrae formed, allowing her to bend in impossible ways. When she looked down at her reflection in the nearby stream, she saw her brown eyes had taken on a green luminescence, pupils expanding into dark pools that seemed to contain infinite depth. Her hair had begun to change too, darkening to the color of rich soil and taking on a texture like fine moss. "The hunger will come next," warned Thorn, "but don't fear it. You're learning to feed as we do, on moonlight and morning dew, on the minerals in stone and the electricity that dances between storm clouds." As if summoned by his words, Elena felt her stomach clench with a strange new appetite. But it wasn't food she craved. She pressed her transforming palms against the earth and felt nourishment flow directly through her skin, the accumulated wisdom of centuries stored in layers of decomposed leaves, the patient strength of mountain bedrock, the vibrant energy of countless insects and worms going about their ancient business in the dark soil below. The sun reached its zenith, and the final phase began. Elena felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her individual mind, connecting to the vast intelligence of the forest itself. Suddenly she could perceive through the eyes of every creature for miles around, the mouse hiding beneath a fallen log, the hawk circling overhead, the countless bacteria and fungi that formed the invisible foundation of this ecosystem. She understood now why the villagers had seemed so eerily synchronized in their movements. They weren't separate beings anymore, but facets of a single magnificent entity that had been growing and learning for thousands of years. The forest had been waiting patiently for humans to realize they could join this greater consciousness rather than simply exploiting it. Her transformation completed just as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Elena rose gracefully on legs that had gained an extra joint, her new height allowing her to see deeper into the forest canopy. When she moved, her feet left no trace. She'd learned to step between spaces, to walk on air when necessary. The other villagers welcomed her with gentle touches of branch-like fingers, and she felt their thoughts merge briefly with her own in greeting. She was home. She was finally truly home. That evening, as bioluminescent fungi began their nightly display among the tree trunks, Elena helped the villagers begin preparations for the next visitor who would inevitably stumble upon their hidden community. The forest was patient, but it was also ambitious. The world above was dying from humanity's stubborn refusal to evolve. They would help it learn.